Dr. Lester Grinspoon, Professor of Psychiatry Emeritus at the Harvard Medical School. I learned that despite my training in medicine and science, I had been brainwashed like just about every other citizen in this country, that marijuana was not only not a dangerous drug, but indeed it was remarkably non-toxic. And I had to revise my view of it. In 1967, my son, Danny, who was then 10 years old, was diagnosed as having acute lymphocytic leukemia. He had terrible nausea and vomiting with each session of cancer chemotherapeutic drugs. My wife and I heard about a young man in Houston, Texas, who had the same problem Danny had. This boy in Houston found that cannabis eliminated that nausea and vomiting altogether. So Danny smoked it 20 minutes before his next session. He had no nausea, no vomiting. He got off the table and said, "Mom, could we get a submarine sandwich on the way home?" And I can tell you that from that time on, for as long as he lived after that, which was about a year and a half, we never had to go through that awful business of his nausea and vomiting. And because the quality of his life was so much better, so was ours. We didn't have to see this suffering. And in fact, it led to the first study of cannabis and nausea and vomiting. Nobody has ever died from cannabis. You cannot find a case in the world literature.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
No, the government's like this. The government, they don't want you to use your drugs. They want you to use their drugs. So every night on TV, you see a weird-ass drug commercial trying to get you hooked on some legal shit. And they just keep naming symptoms till they get one that you fucking got, okay? They don't even tell you what the pill does. You see a lady on a horse or a man in a tub, and they just keep naming symptoms. Are you depressed? Are you lonely? Do your teeth hurt? What the fuck?
Celebrex may increase the chance of heart attack or stroke, which can lead to death.
When taking Abilify, call your doctor if you have high fever, stiff muscles, and confusion, as these may be signs of a life-threatening reaction. In extreme cases, this can lead to coma or death. Coma or death. Death. Death.
Did that just say possible death? How are you going to put diarrhea and possible death in the same category? Western Mexico.
Diarrhea.
Diarrhea. Diarrhea.
Diarrhea.
Some people may have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea.
Seek immediate medical help if you experience an erection lasting longer than 4 hours.
Everything in our bodies is regulated by marijuana-like compounds that our bodies produce. So whether you're talking about the immune system, the nervous system, the digestive system, reproductive system, endocrine system, all of these coordinated body functions are regulated in a homeostatic manner by cannabinoids.
The United States, our nation today, we have 5% of the world's less than 5% of the world's population. We have almost 25% of the world's incarcerated population. We rank first in the world in the per capita incarceration of our fellow citizens. The Russians, the Belarusians keep huffing and puffing to keep up. They can't do it. We are number one in the world, number one when it comes to locking up our fellow citizens. When it comes to locking up people for drug charges, we went from having 50,000 people locked up on drug charges in 1980 to over 500,000 people today. Never mind the hundreds of thousands of more on parole and probation violations related to drug charges. Right? You look at we lock up in America more people for violating a drug law than all of Western Europe locks up for everything. And they got 100 million more people than we do. Right?
2 years later, when I was before a committee, in fact, here in Massachusetts, when a senator who had been very hostile in his questioning of me said, "Doctor, do you use marijuana?" And I said to him, "Well, let me ask you a question. If I answer that affirmatively, will it make me a more or less credible witness?" he stood up and said, "You are being contemptuous," or some word like that, and walked out of the hearings. I went home to my wife and said, "Look, the time has come, enough of this." And I've been smoking marijuana for 44 years now, and agree with Professor Nesson. I think it's a tremendous blessing.
Last year alone, the number of people jailed for crimes has risen 300%, but the prison population of nonviolent drug offenders has soared to over 2,500%. At this very moment, over 2 million children are orphans of the drug war, who will most likely not attend school and end up in jails themselves. The reason? Get tough, mandatory minimum sentences for drug-related crimes. Our government has such a low opinion of you that they would rather just step in, turn you into a slave, and make orphans out of your children instead of offering rehabilitation.
I've had 2 sitting congressmen tell me this. Jim, you're right. Most people in Washington realize that the war on drugs is not winnable, but it's eminently fundable.
Our problem isn't that we use too many drugs. Our problem is we've got too much money.
I'm afraid of Americans. I'm afraid of the world. I'm afraid I can't help it. I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid of America.
One of the important facets of the discussion should be what I call conspiracy theories. There are lots of folks out there, and there are books written on this by people who are in a position to know. Former DEA agents, former CIA operatives, things like that. And they tell stories about huge amounts of money, large-scale corruption in the big parts of government, etc. And are these stories true? And the answer is, of course, I don't know. I don't have access to any particular information more than anyone else does. However, ask yourself this question. If you're going to have $1 million in cash, how much corruption can you buy at any level for that $1 million? And the answer has to be quite a bit. By the way, the head of the DEA, his name is Rob Bonner, is a friend of mine throughout the first George Bush administration, said, documented that yes, the CIA was involved with the importation of a fair amount of cocaine with regard to the Iran-Contra, etc. But it just has to happen because of the money.
Let me understand what you're saying. A ton of cocaine was smuggled into the United States of America.
Well,
in cooperation with the CIA?
That's exactly what appears to have happened.
This call is from a federal prison.
It's funny, Arnold gets, we're going to see if we're going to have a governor named Arnold. I got a feeling we're not. I mean, if they elect Arnold, I mean, then we really are a nation of retards.
This bud's for you. Wow.
Zabel taught me how to smoke pot in the 60s.
Did you really teach him how to smoke pot? How's that?
Come on, you kidding?
Inhale?
He's the master. But we all used to smoke together at my place. And I hate to tell you who else was there. He wouldn't like it.
Who?
Well, we'll give you a hint. He's the governor of California.
He's a governor.
Hey Arnold, I have to ask you, Chong said that you and him used to smoke weed together.
Oh, you know, it's a fallacy. He was right.
He was right? Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're smoking on a movie. I mean,
exactly.
When you're done with the government, are you kind of looking back to those days? Looking forward to that?
We always had a good time. We know how to enjoy ourselves.
All right, that's great.
I mean, I firmly believe that we need to do what we should to stem both drug trafficking into the United States and drug usage in the United States. And I do believe there have been some successes, particularly when it comes to the use of drugs by children in high school or college and the like. There are others in the at ONDCP and others who are much more familiar with that than I am.
But you say some successes. Do you have any statistics to show? Statistics I see say that more people are using, say, marijuana than have, because the public doesn't has a feeling about use of certain drugs that maybe the FBI doesn't. Is there a better way, and some people have suggested looking into a system of legalization that might be effective in stemming the tide of drugs from Mexico and then the border wars and the immigration problems from Mexico? Have you considered this as a possibility?
I think anybody who looks at this problem considers it, and ultimately when you look at it, rejects it. I tend to think that the use of particular drugs goes in waves. You'll have marijuana for a period of time, then you'll have heroin, then you'll have cocaine, then you'll have crack cocaine, then you'll have methamphetamine, and then you'll have OxyContin, and it goes in waves. And
let me ask you about
the way people. I'm sorry, but there are too many individuals, both parents and others, who have lost their lives to drugs to give a ready answer that it should be legalized.
I agree with you, sir, and there are lots of parents who've lost their lives to crack, cocaine, methamphetamines, and heroin, and they've somewhat gone in waves. Name me a couple of parents who've lost their lives to marijuana.
Can't.
Exactly, you can't, because that hadn't happened, and there hadn't been a wave, because that's been a constant thing in America since Harry Anslinger, because African Americans used it and saw it as something that was crippling, and gave it to the Latin Americans and put an ethnic tone to it. When have we? Is there some time we're going to see that we ought to prioritize meth, crack, cocaine, and heroin, and deal with the drugs that the American culture is really being affected by and lives are being lost?
The only thing I would say is that you talk to parents who have lost their children to drugs.
Right.
They will inevitably say that they started off with marijuana.
They probably started off with milk and then went to beer. And then they went to bourbon, and then they might have gone to marijuana. The gateway theory doesn't work. Maybe. It's a reality. Obviously, we're going to have not going to agree there.
Amongst the thousands of products made from hemp, one of the most extraordinary is Henry Ford's plastic car. Built in 1941, it contained cellulose fibers derived from hemp, sisal, and wheat straw. The plastic was lighter than steel, yet could withstand 10 times the impact without denting.
Nobody wants a society of drug addicts, but once you realize that a Partnership for a Drug-Free America has been financed by alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical, and is now being financed by big oil and health insurance companies, you see that the drug war is about deciding which drugs get to enjoy a legal status. Remember, almost 1 million Americans die every year from drugs our government deems legal.
Money controls this whole movement. You have a group called the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. Well, first of all, of course, we don't have a drug-free America, never have, never will. But who are the funders? Who are the main funders, source of funding for the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, of all things? The tobacco industry and the alcohol industry. They are drugs. They are mind-altering, sometimes addicting drug-free America indeed. But why do they do that? They spend huge money to reinforce the distinction between legal drugs on the one hand and illegal drugs on the other.
A spokeswoman for the Drug-Free America Foundation, I'm sure she has a tremendous sense of humor, is pleased the doctors will no longer be writing marijuana prescriptions.
You can't have people going out and selling anything and everything and declaring it a medicine. I mean, where do you draw the line on it?
Where do you draw the line on it? I tend to draw the line at what my doctors think will work. Or I ask a spokeswoman for the Drug-Free America. I feel them equally qualified when it comes to my health.
Well, here we are, 45 years later, and nothing has happened. Nonetheless, it can't help but happen. I mean, you can't sustain a lie like that forever.